Outlaws. Ish, Garvin, Yeri, and the leader of their small band of mischievous outlaws, as that's what they were, outlaws, Orlo, were trotting along the edge of a little pathway in the local forests of Caria, a local land which was also the name of one of the local towns in the area, on horseback. None of these outlaws were born in this town, and none cared to know it, save but for one devious purpose, and so they began to speak of it tactically, and subsequently with a certain detachment from it. Orlo spoke first. We'll go in at the stroke of midnight, said Orlo. Orlo was a largish man, somewhat stocky, but lean with some muscle. He had a noble look to him, despite his current occupation. Remind me again which houses we're hitting, asked Ish. Ish was basically second in command. Tall and thin, and he always had something particularly snarky and suggestive to comment, though Orlo sometimes did not listen. He often did, however. The one furthest west and the one next to it with the strange roof, replied Yeri, who never seemed to forget a thing. He was shorter than both Orlo and Ish by several inches, but always seemed to keep up with them in most regards anyway. Right, said Garvin, not really contributing much. His large size and massive strength were his benefits to the group as a whole, as they kept potential threats from attacking. Often, actually, and when they did, if all else failed, Garvin was always good for a whacking or two. Change of plan, boys, said Orlo. Change of plans, remarked Ish. What are the new plans, then? We'll be hitting the church in the center of the town. That's more loot there. There's more loot there. Obviously there's more loot there, said Ish, as the other two listened somewhat anxiously. We'll get caught. This is a small town, retorted Orlo, and worth the risk. Garvin seemed to agree, but Yeri still appeared anxious. I don't think that's a very good idea, said Yeri. We should stick to our prior plan. We saw the loot they have there. That's enough. Orlo shook his head. There's much more in the church. We would be fools not to take it. We might be fools to attempt it, said Ish, but I'll follow you down whichever path you deem fit, Orlo. Garvin nodded. It's the same with me. Yeri didn't respond for a moment, but then somewhat begrudgingly, and with a heavy sigh, he said, and with me. Good, said Orlo, smiling, clearly pleased with the outcome, even if Yeri wasn't. We'll go at midnight quietly and quickly. Think you can manage that, Garvin? Garvin shrugged. It's worked so far. Good, said Orlo. Ish, I want you to stay with Garvin and I. Yeri, you'll be the scout. The scout, said Yeri. No, not me. Yes, you, said Orlo. Why me? Orlo looked over his horse, a look of sly satisfaction on his face. Because you are the smallest and the least easily seen of us all. Yeri, you'll go first. Yeri sighed. Midnight? Midnight, said Ish. Orlo was riding ahead. It was nearly dusk. They would pick an area, make a small camp, and regroup for the small raid later on. Hours passed and the night grew darker. The town had no watchmen as it was a small place, and very few people dared to attack or rob any town in the kingdom, because most people wanted to keep their heads. But the band was fairly confident in their abilities. They had done this more than once, and in fact had done it a large number of times. They were notorious, known as the elusive Outlaws of the West. That was their title. And they were proud, though they obviously never spoke about it. Nobody knew what they looked like, as they only struck at night, and no town ever expected it, because the group only did a handful of jobs over somewhat long spans of time, say 3 or 4 months. Still, there was an air of added diligence in most towns now, but not this town, not Caria. It made Orlo grin just thinking about it. As the night passed on even further, the group formed together around a small campfire that Yeri had started for them. Are we ready? Yeri asked the group. Ish nodded. I believe so. Orlo? Garvin remained silent, listening. Orlo? Ish repeated. Yes, said Orlo assuredly, appearing as if he had been distracted in the fire's flames. Yes, it is time to begin. Garvin chuckled. Let's go then, said Ish. Their horses tied, they left the fire to burn there on the forest floor. After all, they would have to have a way of finding their camp's location when they were finished, and if all went according to plan, the fire would have enough wood for them to find it afterwards. If things didn't go so well, they had their swords. The band of friends rarely killed anyone, but if someone came after them with a weapon, they also rarely hesitated. However, they didn't often have to do such a thing, and Orlo, despite his many quirks and twisted sense of humor, didn't like to. As such, the group avoided it, even running away in some cases to avoid brutalizing anyone. This was a part of their reputation, which was good. It didn't make them any better liked, but they liked to have that part of their group persona amplified as much as possible, as it made it easier for them to raid and steal from the towns they stole from, giving people the impression that they were each a good sort of bad. In some ways, perhaps, but they were still robbing for personal gain, selfishly, and they did not care about what happened to the lives of those of whom they robbed after, and because they robbed them, effectively making them truly the bad kind of bad. They just weren't that bad. They were tolerable, and maybe that's why the people of this kingdom, the kingdom of Caria, kept getting robbed. Orlo took the lead naturally, with Ish following suit closely after, followed by Yeri and then Garvin, which coincidentally was the order they'd stacked up in earlier when riding, and often it did stack up. It was their hierarchy, one might conclude. As they were approaching the town, Orlo made note of the terrain as best he could in the dimness of the night. There was a partial moon, and so the ground was somewhat illuminated, and there were few clouds. No need for a torch or so, Orlo rationalized. Unfortunately, that meant that they could be spotted more easily once they got through the town and to the church. They would have to be careful. Stealthily, the band of men approached the town, which could be seen from afar by the various lanterns that hung on old iron posts, which stood in key locations around the town, such as the entrances, some of the more important buildings, and, of course, the church. Orlo was not worried. He stood confidently calculating the perfect time to make their entrance, as there were a few people still out and about. Orlo couldn't see them, but he could hear the doors of the houses and buildings creaking open and shutting behind them. He knew that he would have to be cautious, as the town did have a pub, and undoubtedly that was the cause of the creaking. Some of the men must be going to or coming back from that pub, Orlo surmised. With a sigh, Orlo began. Yeri, check it out. Yeri left the band and returned quickly. It's good to go. With a sigh, Orlo began. Let's go. Orlo walked towards the center of the town, edging his way around a myriad of buildings and forcing himself to stay off the main road, which ran down the center of the town and led directly to the church. Instead, he and his band of men took a road parallel to the main one that was darker and less frequented, or so he imagined, and quickly and quietly stepped their way towards the church, easily located by the two street lanterns hanging on their respective old iron posts. Focused, the four made sure to watch for any stragglers from the pub and cautiously stepped closer and closer to the church. They would enter through the back door, which they'd spotted when they did a survey of the town during the daytime. Oftentimes villagers and townfolks were weary of strangers, but sometimes they were quite friendly, and this town had been a very friendly town. Easier to rob, the gang had surmised. It was a primary reason that Orlo had decided to commit to the job here. At this town, and there was much to gain, much at risk. Hurriedly now, he made his way to the steps of the church at the back entrance. Large pillars stood on the side of the entrance, visible only slightly because of the moon. Garvin, Orlo whispered harshly, get this door open. Garvin listened, pulling out a large but handheld battering ram. Yeri and he grabbed hold of it, pulled it back, and heaved it forward, crashing it into the door. There was one loud crash, and the band rushed in. They already knew where to look, under the floorboards and on top of the altar at the end of the hallway, or the hall between the pews. All churches were structured basically the same, and they didn't change much, and they'd robbed many of them in the past, so it was easy to find the loot. Hurriedly still, Orlo lit a torch which he'd carried with him on his belt, and took out his sword to begin to pull open the boards of the floor, quickly locating the treasure he so earnestly desired to acquire. When he pulled out the chest beneath the floor, he noticed something, however. They were light, too light. He opened one up, and there was nothing inside of it. Nothing at all. Angrily, he whispered to the men, we need to get out of here. Now! The door closed behind them. Orlo and the band looked back quickly and were gripped by panic. In a moment, the church in front of the altar to start was set on fire, the band trapped within its walls.